Rated a real paradigm shift. So the Geoverse, is it going to be a paradigm shift for us? So we'll have some panelists talk about some of those details. So getting to the panelists, I should introduce myself first. I'm Rich Baldwin. I'm the Data Access Branch Chief at NCI, NOAA's Environmental Data Center. We have with us as on the panel, Jonathan Blythe. He's a data manager for the Department of Interior, Bureau of Ocean, Energy and Management, Environmental Studies Studies Program. He has participated in ESIP meetings since 2010 and has
good morning.
Been active in the community resilience and discovery clusters. This is this year, Jonathan championed the development of the ESP Hub, and which refreshes ESP investments in geospatial information by using new capabilities in Esri's ArcGIS online platform. Jonathan has worked across academia, government, and private sectors on issues concerning technology, data management, and ocean observing. Next, we have Josh Lieberman. Josh develops, leads, and manages OGC's Collaborative Solutions and Innovations Program. Originally trained as a geologist and environmental scientist, Josh has been involved in OGC both as a member and as an architect for almost 2 decades, while serving as principal at Tumbling Walls, senior geospatial analysis manager at, let me get this wrong again, Deloitte. Very good. Deloitte, and led Harvard Center for Geographic Analysis. Josh currently leads the IP Initiative Disaster Pilot this year, Analysis Ready Data, and Geodata Cube tracks of Testbed 19, as well as working to develop future IP initiatives and supporting OGC standards activities such as MUDDI, ARD, GDC. And online we have Phil Yang. Phil's professor of GIS at George Mason, where he directs NSF Spatial, Temporal, and Innovative Center. He is a longtime ESIP participant since 2003 and co-founded the ESIP Cloud Computing Cluster with Thomas Huang of NASA JPL. He has published 200 plus papers and graduated 30 plus PhD students, with approximately half as academia as professors and half in industry as technical leaders. His current research focus is on spatial temporal computing and digital twins. And finally, Ryan Bruckheimer is a physical scientist with the Data Access Branch at NOAA NCI, and it's part of the NESDIS line office. Through his career, Ryan has worked on projects spanning various domains, including solid state energy, transformation physics, microbiology and RNA, cloud-based science, education, surface mining related, reclamation, hydrology, regulatory oversight, GIS-focused software engineering, knowledge graph design, climate and weather related, algorithm development, and enterprise information architecture. His current area of effort includes generalized interoperability frameworks, Earth system digital twins, and supporting a better world for all through open science. So with that introduction to the panelists, we'll get a framing overview by Ryan and get started with the discussion. We got Phil?
Yeah, it's Phil's on.
Okay. Thanks, everybody, and thanks, Rich, and the presenters. And I want to say this session is introducing a new concept. Please, be a little messy. Please feel free to, speak up. Voice questions, discussion. Otherwise it'll just be me and Josh and Phil and Jonathan debating for 90 minutes. So I just want to frame this because as a new concept, we want to make sure we understand the grounding. So this is, let's see, go forward is arrow. So the provenance of this is a paper that came out, a discussion paper last year, actually right after the ESIT meeting in Pittsburgh. And it was pushed out by the UN Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information Management. And they're describing this, this Geoverse, right? So what is it? And it's, in the paper, we'll talk about all this, but essentially it also lays out a pathway or solution pathways. The motivations for this, this concept and pushing this now, our world is in a state of continual change. I think that's the highlight here. You know, a lot of context around that. It's disruptive. It's being driven large part right now by commercial geospatial industry. But we need to, the paper says we need to not only be a recipient of that change, we need to be part of directing at least the policy and governance aspects of this change. And also, the socioeconomic aspirations of many countries converge around achieving something like this, a more sustainable and resilient future where economic prosperity will benefit all of society and support the health and well-being of communities and individuals equitably. There are three major themes of the Geoverse, and these are pulled directly out, so these are direct quotes. Enable unified solutions to global challenges, deliver affordable and equitable access to knowledge on demand, and ensure we continue to bridge the geospatial digital divide. The paper further goes into some direction, and these are all lifted from the paper, right? Everything in this framing is. What has become clear from discussions is the geospatial landscape needs to move beyond data as a focal point of activity to processing and synthesizing data into contextualized information. Having knowledge as the focal point of the future geospatial information ecosystem is crucial, and I hope we get into discussing, what knowledge is, what's different about it. Moving towards a more integrated system of systems approach and the Geoverse. And then it lays out these pathways that I'll just overview very quickly, but these pathways describe step changes that we can make and then final states in terms of all these different areas from policy to technology, et cetera. So some thinking things when we're having this meeting and this discussion. Are we moving in the right direction? Please apply these questions to your own enterprise, your own company, your own use or participation, right? So are we moving? Are you in your organization moving in the right direction? What do you think the main challenges will be? What are we doing now that works well and will contribute to the future? What is the best thing we can achieve moving forward, and what will be the most valuable outcome for you? And then here are the tables. So you can pull these up. The PDF is linked in a lot of different places, but there are 9 of these pathways, and you can see each one lays out what is a swim lane here. What do we have maybe if we've achieved maturity to spatial data infrastructure, and then what would we want to move to? And we can treat these, and these are treated as sort of a holistic leveling framework, and that view I think we should also discuss. But you can see here, and just calling out, at the bottom, in the bottom swim lane here, we have community of practice swim lane. Sharing and leveraging data and technology standards. I think, we're kind of here, we're already here. We're sharing this stuff. We all have SDIs. What could we move to in this swim lane? Well, we could move to inclusive and participatory roles in data vocabularies, digital twins, other for IR standards development, et cetera. And these are all referenced. So with that, I'll turn it over to our moderator. Introduce the first speaker.
So our first speaker, we're going to go with Jonathan, right? Yep.
These are your slides.
Just presented that. It's a social one. You got it up in the tab. Oops. Browser is social. All right, so thank you so much for introducing and framing the Geoverse. It was a new concept to me, and I saw Ryan's proposal for this session when there was a call for sessions, and I reached out to him and invited myself to participate. So it's very gracious to encourage me to participate in this session. And I want to just highlight some things that really resonated with me from that white paper. And I call this talk the social dimensions of the Geoverse, to kind of develop, those are really important aspects in that white paper, but to develop those concepts a little further. How do I go down? It's going to be a continual thing. How do I advance? Oh, just press harder. Okay. There we go. All right. So I'm a data manager, and so the way I like to talk about this contextual improvement of data is in terms of our data management tasks. And so these are some things that we do. These are conventional things we do as data managers. Geospatial metadata, for example. And the equation at the bottom is what, if you can accept this. So what we're doing as data managers is we take the facts, which are a function of data, we add the context, and that equals stories, or a story that's a function of information. So if you want to think about it this way, data managers, our role is to support storytelling. And this is the direction we need to be moving according to this Geoverse white paper, to realize, because we all work for organizations and they're telling a story, a perspective. So that presents this issue, this kind of problem that we might have is we have a fact and there might be two stories that don't completely overlap. And so how do we evaluate the validity of this interpretation of the facts? In the earth sciences, we have a system of peer review in journals and whatnot, so we can evaluate the methods of analysis and validate that. But in the open science framework, there are other people who need to tell stories too, and they might not be telling those stories in journal articles. And so I work for a government agency that is regulatory, and we have an evidence building agenda. We're trying to address our mission information needs. And one way that we validate data that are used for our mission is we have to see that the data come from, are applicable to the agency activity. So if we're building a wind farm, we want to see that the data came from that location. It literally has to be from the development area. And that's kind of a different criteria that we would use from just a journal article about environmental impacts in general. And tribes assert their rights to tell stories about the earth. They have traditional knowledge, and the way they evaluate the facts is whether their tribes have given consent for the collection of the data. And it goes beyond that. In fact, they also, once the scientist has consent, they also want to have fact checking on the interpretation. Because the problem they see is that data, once it's out in the public realm, could be used against their interests. So they want to control the access to that data. And citizen scientists are telling stories as well. So they have traditional ecological knowledge. These are, knowledge that they pick up from living in a place or from their livelihoods. Like fishers, they know where the fish are because they're always trying to find them. And so a scientist who does surveys or whatever might come up with a map, and it's really important to ground truth that with the traditional ecological knowledge. So you come up with a, ground truthing or fact checking of the scientific models. So just one thing about the previous slide, it might appear these things, you have two stories that appear to be in conflict, but if you look at the facts in detail, there might not be really that much, you might be able to reconcile those two perspectives. So to the Geoverse, if we define these by social dimensions, what we're trying to do essentially is enable many or all segments of society to realize the maximum collective benefits from the sciences or from the geospatial information, while also reconciling their unique perspectives. And so if this is literally a dimension, and I just drew this, but this is like a normal curve, and you design a geoverse to address this central tendency or the mode, then you're missing what might be potentially a minority perspective along this dimension. And distributions never are this distinct, so it's not to say that the minorities always like in that percentile for, they're not segregated in quite this way all the time. But we have to be aware that if we're designing it for the central tendency, we're not addressing their needs. So what we should strive to do, and this could actually, this is from ethics theory. So there's this hedonic method for deciding what's right and wrong. And that will sometimes produce the wrong answer because of this problem that, you might be asking people to do things that are counter their interests. And there's a deontological approach that is more logic or rules-based that's more appropriate. So bottom line here is that with Geoverse, you should look at each of the social dimensions, however they might be defined, and not address just that central tendency, but strive to incorporate the perspectives of the minorities. So this is my last slide, I think. Yeah. So we want to ensure the benefits of earth science data are more broadly accessible and applicable. This also involves communicating so that people know about them, can find out about them, where they are, rather than having to come and engage with the scientific processes. And in some situations, we actually have to limit the interpretation of data or flag situations when the data does not compute or does not meet conditions for that interpretation. There's another session just now. I'm really disappointed I'm missing on interdisciplinary science. I think that's a step change. If we can solve the problems for data use between disciplines, that's kind of a microcosm of the broader problem we're talking about here. Social science is not a monolithic thing. For each of the social dimensions, there might be a different expertise set that we have to incorporate. So how do we identify and fully engage with the social sciences to develop the Geoverse? Legal interoperability is a potential step change if we can figure that out. And I think ESIF's been doing the right thing for a number of years now. Democratization of data, the presentations earlier this morning, enabling other people to tell stories with their science data. So thanks so much.
I think we're good. Josh, you ready to come up?
That's the one. Great. Good morning. So I'm going to represent the the skeptical wing of the panel here. So I first, heard about Geoverse and looked through the report and I thought, well, interesting term. I wonder where that came from. And, of course, I Googled it and said, okay, networking contractors and, data repositories. And this doesn't sound very grand. And then Ryan set this up and said, well, we're going to talk about the step change. And I was like, step change? Come on. Well, it may be a step change, but if it is a step change, it's just another part of a staircase. So I'm going to step back a little bit and see what pieces might be leading to this thing that we might decide to call the Geoverse and might find some value in, and go from there. So this does start with this idea of spatial data infrastructure. And we tend to have a kind of a simplistic idea of that now, but it really, at the time that you would have this data which was common, ask somebody in Europe 2 decades ago if anybody was having common data. It didn't happen. And the idea that Bruce Kahan worked on, that data actually was something that you invested in, that was an asset that you needed to maintain the value of. This was all pretty revolutionary at the time and was developed into this pretty comprehensive picture of, well, we have the content, but we have technology tools, we have policy and governance, organizations, cooperation, all these pieces to make spatial data infrastructure not only common and reusable, but sustainable. And so this was quite powerful, except, one of the aspects of this, if you delved into the clearinghouse, was, oh, this is wonderful data set. And at the bottom it says, call this number. And well, we'll see. So there was room for improvement, and there was improvement. One of the improvements was the result of success. When they had these data in these little enclaves, everybody understood it. When you started making data more common, now it was started to be used by people who had no idea what this data referred to. And so the idea of spatial information, semantic framework and uplift, cross-community mediation. It was a theoretical concept, particularly when OGC started. It was a group that died out. And by 2006, actually, it came back. I founded the geosemantics group at OGC because we were victims of our own success and needed somehow to involve these communities who wanted in and couldn't read the instructions. So that's continued to evolve, bringing these concepts together of sustainability and accessibility. I mean, this is all of those concepts which are kind of getting combined together in this mission of OGC now of FAIR, findable, accessible, interoperable, and then the 4 R's, reusable, so on. But you get the idea, and there's a lot of pieces to this. They're not uniform and unified. It really is what's led to this idea that it's a federation, it's an ecosystem of pieces with, has to be the minimum structure that enables that to function together. So it's, increasing the functionality, but decreasing the necessary governance in order to have this work. The other really, evolutionary part is this, discovery that it's not enough to have data and a phone number, that you actually have services and applications and ways that you work with the infrastructure and the infrastructure does work for you. So the idea of what can be common, what is feasible, tractable from a policy and resource point of view, and is something that people can get their hands around, has really developed. And that has led to, I think, another development, which is to say, okay, we have infrastructure data, we have services, we have sensors that are telling us what's going on right now. We have models that put that together and tell us, what is happening now, or what will happen in the future or what could happen if things were different, the what if, the simulation. So, there are in this model both more holistic representation, more dynamism, but also more alternatives. I mean, this is the multiverse here, right? Well, what if, we actually put money into infrastructure? Just saying. The other interesting thing that's developing out of this ideal, this concept of digital twins, well, a couple things. One is, and Jonathan talked about this very well, that we have not just the physical dimension that geospatial data represents, but also the social dimension. And those have each their representation in the digital domain. So we call it the digital twin, but really the concept that we're working towards is the digital triplet of the three elements that are in sync. The other thing that digital twins, kind of lost in the hype was this idea that if we develop a capable enough infrastructure, that it actually not only has these features and this content, but it actually has its own behavior. And it's something that we expect that infrastructure to look like the things we're interested in, to behave like the things we're interested in based on sensors and models, but not be the thing, that we can still distinguish between that representation and reality. And not only is it a good idea not to confuse one with the other, but it's incredibly important have the benefits of that digital domain to be clear that it is not the physical or the social domain. That's certainly a problem with some teenagers and social media. So it's at many different levels an issue. So I just wanted to throw out some random bullets, and hopefully this starts some discussion. When we talk about immersion and digital reality and so on, it's funny, it always leads me back to this idea of the one-to-one map, right? And this Lewis Carroll, Jorge Luis Borges was also writing stories about this. People want to have a map and they want to have all the details on it. And, really we have to have a map at the same scale as reality. And then who needs a map? We'll just use reality. And there's some great funny stories about that. But the part that people often don't get out of those is that we have maps because they're not reality, right? We have maps because they only pull up the things that we need to focus on and not the sheer mass of reality. So that information hiding, that selectivity, that it's wrong but it's useful, that we say of statistics and models, is a feature. It's not a bug. And in that way, people talk about augmented reality, it's the future. And better augmented reality may be the future. Ask next year after I get my hands on one of the Apple glasses. But really, the first augmented reality was maps and cave paintings, right? Adding information to the world that we work with. It's not easy. It's amazing. A few years ago, a meeting with some USGS folks, and I put up a picture of a geologic map, and not actually that many of the people, in the room knew how to interpret that, knew how to look at that, look at reality and put them together in their minds. So a lot of the augmented reality technology is making that easier, requiring less skills, having greater accessibility, and that extends into more immersive versions where you can take that augmented reality wherever you want. That's virtual reality, it's the metaverse, and it makes a lot of sense that although you're working with a representation which is wrong, still that immersive quality does mirror the world that you live in. So the idea that you're immersed in the physical and social world, and then you're looking at these little pieces of the representations of it, it actually doesn't make a lot of sense. So immersion, immersive visualization makes a lot of sense, if only we can make it as easy to use as the AAA map. But when we start talking about something called a geoverse, even if it's derived from all of these, it's referring to something. It's referring to all of the other terms that we stick onto verse. And chief among them is metaverse. And who knows what that really is, but it's clear that it has immersive qualities and a shaky connection to reality. So maybe when we talk about Geoverse, by using geo, somehow we're saying, well, this is maybe it's a part of the metaverse, but it's the part that we can trust, that has at least some definable connection to reality, to our geosphere. And then I finally have to ask, is this a step in the right direction, or is it a slide in the wrong direction? So I'm reserving judgment, but you shouldn't. So hopefully you can hear from the rest of you. Thanks.
We'll have Phil Yang, who's online.
Yeah, could I share my screen or?
Yeah, you go ahead, Phil. You can hear us fine. We can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rich. Let's see. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see you fine.
Okay, great. Yeah, sorry, I cannot be there. I wish I could be there. And when I went online this morning, I said, oh, it's great that we have many people in the room here. As all our previous panelists said, Dataverse is really new to me too. So I'm in the learning process. I'm a professor and also a technical person. So I learn new concept by looking at the problem and the concept. So what I did is that I have two set of slides. One is an example to state what could be it mean for Dataverse and what challenges and alternatives we have from a research or technical development perspective. And then I have one slide to summarize some thoughts about how to reach Dataverse and what do we need to do by bridging what we're doing now within the ESIP or Earth Science information domain versus the Geoverse. So we know that this happened, climate change is happening, and we are experiencing severe drought across the globe. And this is the map produced by Canada climate or environmental agencies. If you look at here in the next about almost 100 years, they will have severe drought in the central region. In fact, interestingly, on the eastern region, they didn't expect that. But last month, or even now, there's a intensive wildfire in the east region of Canada. And that caused a lot of problem for us. So what's the problem? In New York, we see this kind of sky. It's covered by the smoke from Canada. And for the community impact, in Fairfax County, which I live in, we have all the schools closed for outdoor activities for about 2 days. Now, this is happening not only in Fairfax County, but also in other counties along the East Coast. So in fact, this is happening and it's not ending in the foreseeable future, as I was reading the news. So with this kind of challenge, what do we need to bring in? So how the Geoverse may come in to help, or the spatial data infrastructure may come in to help. Obviously, this needs us to understand better about the data sets about the phenomena. So we look to Earth observation data sets. For example, this is the GOES 16 data sets we're looking at. We can notice that there's a lot of clouds, and in the evening hours, we probably cannot get anything. So when we try to pull things together to understand better the situation, we get this a lot, low data. We don't have the data sets, but that's already the best data we could have every 5 minutes with the AOD. And then eventually, by the morning time, when the sun comes out, and we could have the data sets. And when you take a look at this closely, we can see the smoke is moving from Canada towards the US and then towards south, and also pushing into the Atlantic Ocean. And when it gets evening hours, again, no data. So on June 7th, we have the same problem, no data sets. And now we have the data sets when the sun comes up. And if you notice the details here, there's a lot of missing data sets, not only just no data sets. So from satellite observations, we're missing data sets. But again, this is probably the best to observe the PM 2.5 of smoke from the space, especially with the temporal resolution. And so we went to look at what other data sets are available. We look at the ground. This is a purple Earth sensor. And if you look at the color change from the green to yellow and red, which means the pollution is heavily increased over there. But you can still see a few green dots over there, which means probably we don't have to close down the school or outdoor activities for those places. But you can see that the smoke, or the PM 2.5, is pushed from the Canada and onto the southern, and then out to the Atlantic Ocean. And you can see that how these yellow and red and orange dots moves towards the south as time goes by. But on the other side, the data sets, when we tried to pull it, it took us a long time at the beginning. Probably a few weeks to download the data sets and then you visualize it. And another challenge is that purple data sets is known to be not so high quality. So we need to improve that in order to address. And so those are the data sets probably available there, but when we make decisions, we really need to come to the community level. This is what you're looking at, something like a digital twin or the future visualization of the results. So what we did is that we put together the buildings and the schools and the different types of building, and where do we have the measurements of the sensors. Eventually, we need to put them together like this, and the data sets we want to have is at this kind of level. And we cannot have these data sets yet. We do not have these data sets yet, either from Earth observation, from the satellite observations, or from the in situ ground observations. So there's still a lot of work needs to be done in order to achieve the decision-making at the community level for the pollutions, for the air quality, and other problems. In fact, just for visualizing this, we spent about a few months to collect all the data sets. We could put them together. We're still working together to increase the resolution of the pollutant data sets. So in order to make this kind of Geoverse happening, we're putting data sets from different spatial data infrastructure and feeding into the decision supporting or visualization or AR, VR tools. There's a lot of challenges. So in summary, we really need to identify the proper data sets which could help us with our pressing challenges. And another important part is to provide accurate uncertainty quantification. This is lacking in most data sets. So what is the data sets we could have, which could have good uncertainty quantification that could go into the future decision support? And also being able to fuse the physics-based model and the AI machine learning model. So data sets are showed, those are observations, and we need the AI machine learning to mine the patterns, mine the principles. But on the other side, we need to feed the patterns, feed the principles into the physical models. So that could help us do better, higher resolution prediction. How to fuse them together, it's a challenge for the spatial data infrastructure, for the computing, and also for the metaverse. And interoperability has been emphasized by everyone, but this is really important. And we'll see that, especially for connectivity. For example, when we try to download the data sets, it took us a few weeks. Could we cut that down to a few hours or even a few minutes? And so that means we have to make the systems scalable, reliable, and also sustainable. And in order to make that happen, we need to adopt the cutting edge computing technologies from cloud computing, the GPU computing, the edge computing, and probably in the future, the quantum computing, especially when it gets to the final stage reaching out to the end users, because there's privacy issues may be engaged. And then we really need to look from the user side, the user inspired research and the challenges that we're facing nationally, internationally, and also globally, and build that into the spatial data infrastructure designing consideration, and also needs to be cross-domain and interdisciplinary or cross-government, as we heard. We really need to integrate at the conceptual level. Now we're talking about Geoverse, but at least we need to be on the same page. What do we really mean by Geoverse? What are the concepts out there? And then being able to look at the systems. What are the systems contribute to Geoverse, and how could we integrate them? And then maybe there's a new challenge come out. We need to come up with a new solution. So how to design to leverage the existing systems, and how to implement that and provide the solution that really impact to provide a solution that could help us on decision making. So that's just thoughts about potential opportunities and challenges. What I presented has been helped by a lot of people. I just want to share them here. And thank you, everyone. And back to you, Rich.
Thank you, Phil. And finally, we'll have Ryan give his presentation.
So this will be, the fourth perspective here. I'm glad we've covered a lot of perspectives and a lot of questions. Hopefully there's some more here. Geoverse enablement activities and considerations going on at NOAA. And this is, across line offices efforts. Let's see. So at CIAS WIGAS 55 this year, I was able to present this concept. I'm coming at this, kind of from, I've worked my entire career, in a lot of different domains, and I've always been frustrated by, specific problems of access and interoperability and, being able to just do my job. And when I was, getting into this work at NOAA and specifically, in the past year working on interoperability frameworks, enterprise level stuff, this Geoverse paper came out and it kind of just resonated with all this stuff we've been doing, working towards with digital twin enablement. It felt like this, here's something we can attach to. So NOAA is currently developing a holistic capability to enable the system of systems step change to some of the ideals that were described in these swim lanes that we showed earlier. From a technology perspective, the way we're going about it is a cloud-based agile reference architecture for evolutionary governance and open innovation. We're trying to create this participatory model for iterative inclusion and improvement of existing systems. We're pulling all these NOAA systems together that have been around for 40, 45 years, right? And that sort of thing. The requirements have come from NCI, from NASDAS, from NOAA, And they've been all wrapped up, and some of the requirements include Web 3.0 standards for semantic interoperability, right? And we are linking this to achieving the original vision of the World Wide Web, 5-star link data, that Tim Berners-Lee vision. Full definition and process provenance for trust and scientific reproducibility, treating process as a data set. And, I've been seeing this come out and we're excited to see it maturing. I've been presenting on this sort of thing since around 2016 at ESIP, PyCon, that sort of thing. Support of federated multi-owner Earth systems, digital twins, and sensor networks. We'd like to go, full process, iterate towards that. But having that full provenance is so important to a repository at the federal level. And we're pursuing this, never fly solo, as Thomas Wang has made it clear. This capability is being pursued through many intra-agency and interagency partnerships. Taking on as much as we can. We need a lot of viewpoints. We need to see how things are working, how they're not working. Let's find alignment and work together. So some of those groups, Phil and his spatiotemporal IUCRC, Josh and the OGC and the pilots that he's running, and NASA with Jacqueline Damania and Kness on some coastal zone digital twins efforts, various other efforts. So kind of getting back to the idea of what is knowledge sharing and what do we mean by that? What is information? I kind of want to, I pulled this directly from the GGIM paper because information, right, in a computer science sense, it's entropy. But here we're meaning something else. We have semantics that mean, this is data that is filtered and analyzed. It's applicable to a specific question. And then going a little bit above that, knowledge means the ability to put information in a context, right? So this is that context sort of theme to answer specific questions. So, users, and if we can increase that user base to mean everybody, we can support, multi-dimensional context. And ultimately, we would like to climb to that top. We have to kind of climb the DIKW pyramid, right? Why, and then as we're working on this and we're deriving specifications and building those, we came to this problem of why is interoperability needed at all? And fundamentally, I think the best way of understanding this from, all my empirical evidence is this is fundamentally a communications problem, right? We have a system of systems here, and this is what the Geoverse is all about. It's saying, we have a system of systems. Let's accept that. Right, and getting just to that acceptance in the framing of digital twins has been an enormous effort over the past year. Right, I remember some earlier meetings from a year and a half ago where this was kind of like, well, maybe we can just make a giant digital twin, right? And there's so much effort to measure, understand, and explain, and we've encoded this in so many different ways, and many of those ways are not easily accessible. Right, it's not treating it, the explanation as data. It's not treating the knowledge as data, right? And data is fundamentally interoperable, right? Because we have scientific frameworks of understanding. Nobody's just coming out and making up, some language that nobody else understands. We work in communities. We work in clusters. We form hierarchies. We form ontologies and things. But most of these efforts, as we've seen, have sort of just continuously fallen over each other. And why is it? I think it's because we're not treating, and the Geoverse I think states this very well. We're not treating this as a system of systems problem, explicitly, right? We have this implicit understanding, but where's the ontology that says that, right? So Conway's law is, I think, a great summary of it. That there's hard limits to how we can communicate in this system of systems approach. And in a derivation for a digital twins framework spec, we've categorized these, and these map to GEO principles. Syntactic, schematic, semantic, and legal interoperability. The terms, depending on what organization is working on this interoperability framework, sort of shift, and these are sort of loose boundaries. It's not really a pyramid, but there are these categories. And when we're talking about technically implementing some of this, these categories work to do that, right? These work. So, a picture of this is, we don't want just one thing. We're not working towards one future reality. You know, reality is always changing. You know, everything's always changing. We need to, you know, sort of leverage that situation and sort of move into a federated view, which then means we have to deal with this problem of interoperability. So at NOAA, we developed a specification based on model-based systems engineering, collected as many requirements as we can. We still update requirements, but there's this MBSE basis, right? So we can trace the ConOps, we can trace the everything. And then we apply these principles of interoperability. We treat process as a data set. We classify tasks and do key-to-key matching for schema, right, between tasks. It makes this problem really easy. How do we run a digital twin, right? How do we move from task to task within a process? Well, you know, we can simplify that just to key matching. And then beyond that, we can apply this level of semantic interoperability. And here's where the Web 3.0 stuff sort of comes in, right? And this other concept of reference model. And then we have this other category, which is sort of hand wavy, right? But we're starting to define it. And it's this concept of legal interoperability. You know, at this point, it's kind of necessarily hand wavy because, you know, we haven't even agreed to the fact that, you know, we want a system of systems, as Josh kind of alluded to, I think, a little bit. And then ultimately, as a system, we're composing a framework, we're putting an API around it, and we're letting everyone participate in it, or we're trying to get there where everyone wants to participate in it. The small static API, it's process-based, it's fully interoperable, and everyone at NOAA can kind of use it, produce data, publish data, you know. And this becomes this idea of a digital twin Earth. And that's how we get to shared knowledge, shared wisdom. And it's not just spatial data, right? And that's something that I think we should discuss a little bit. This is a lot more technical, but, you know, I just want to show this slide to show, you know, what we're talking about when we're talking about semantic interoperability is, you know, supporting any expression, right? Here we have a Morton food web. We can express this really easily as you know, within a framework that's semantically interoperable. And then we can also make it interoperable at multiple other levels. We can automate all this, right? And we've kind of shown that. But you know, drawing it back to the point of this, bringing everybody together here, you know, I think the best way to approach this and how I understand it is, you know, as kind of Phil showed, you know, you call it a dataverse, right? Call it as you know, Josh says, my opinion of this is kind of, you know, the labeling is not as important. You know, look at the leveling tables, treat it as a leveling framework. You know, this is a system of systems, but there has to be something wrapped around, you know, open science, or, you know, or we won't have control over it, or it'll fizzle out, you know, right? So just concluding, some observations and concerns. You know, an observation, a truism to me, our virtual reality is changing very fast. Capability, use, and the ability to trust. Observation, our physical world is changing very fast. It's exponentially increasing challenges and risks, and I think Phil's presentation really captured that. Concerns, without immediate and thoughtful disruptive change in our processes and machine communication patterns, we may not catch the wave and could lose stake in the technological narrative, right? Nobody's going to stop pushing out large language models that could spit out complete nonsense. If we don't consider this now, that's a question for the group, right? If we do not have a federated vision and governance model, open science may fail due to lack of coordinated movement and solution. And this has ripple effects and trustability in earth science, the ability to respond to climate change and disasters, right? If we end up in a place where nothing's interoperable, you know, because we didn't have a federated vision and governance model, you know, we won't be any better than we are now, and we'll actually be a whole lot more complex. And complexity in computer science is not good. And my final concern is if our solutions don't make it easy, accessible, and satisfactory for contributors and consumers, open science may fail due to lack of adoption. And I want to tie this back to the most upvoted comment at the plenary, which was, you know, what's in it for me? You know, open science, what is it, right? What do I get out of it? So that's it for me. Thanks.
All right, now we're going to move into our discussion section. And just to reiterate, really it really helped me connect with Phil's example with the smoke and school closures. And I'm thinking, okay, nursing homes, people that need to be on other oxygen, when smoke is bad, and this the Geoverse slide where we go to Web 3.0, what other connection points get made so that our emergency responders can, help those folks that are, needing an oxygen or something when there's a smoke plume or some impact like that. So just to open up to questions now, I guess one to Phil, specifically to your question or to your problem statement on the smoke. What other data points or what other folks were able to use that smoke information, to connect, as we kind of walk toward that Geoverse.
Well, yeah, that's a very good question. In fact, what kind of data sets could we use, or what kind of actionable information could we have? For the one that we're working on now, in fact, we just get started on that project. Eventually, we hope that we could produce like 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, or even 500 meter by 500 meter air quality information. So that could be utilized by first, because it's for research at the use case site. In this case, we're working with, for example, Carrimore at Chimney Township, and some of the data sets will go to LA. If we want to go through the global wise, as we're talking about now for Geoverse, really addressing the global challenges, I think we need a much bigger spatial data infrastructure and much better earth science data management, processing, computing to supply the support for the global users. So that's in the future, and I hope by January Easter time we could have better results to report. And definitely those data information, we hope that they could be utilized. For example, the citizens, once we integrate the wildfire and the air pollutants come out from the plants and others, so we could get an accurate prediction of that, so that can be utilized by the citizens to make decision. Should I go out today or not? Or because of the emergency of the emission of some toxic gases, we should be staying in the house for the next hour or two. So that's in fact gets to the real time. So yeah, we do hope the data sets could be used for decision making as actionable information. And that's also what Ryan was talking. Let's get the data to the information, to the knowledge that can be used for decision making.
Thanks, Phil. So we'll take other questions from the audience, folks. Tom?
Heard three stories at the conference that sort of have common themes. So we heard about the flood response in Vermont and how much of the current flood response was informed by the lessons learned from Irene, where things were much more challenging because it was sort of the first time people have had to respond to floods of that magnitude, at least in recent memory. The smoke example, similar story, right? We've got this problem. How do we figure out the granularity of the problem? Well, the data's all over the place, and we've got to figure out what it means and how to combine it. And there are models that have to be built. So there's this ramp up of how, now that we can anticipate this as a repeatable problem, how do we ramp that up and get to that transition that, Ryan, you're envisioning of the systems of systems. And then the third story was the New York Times COVID example, right? Started off as a Google spreadsheet and then became more and more systematized over time. So what I'm hearing of these stories is that we're not talking about a step function. We're talking about a lot of transitions, sort of sinusoidal curves that are going to be happening at different frequencies and paces and problem domains over time. And what we want is a framework so that when people sort of encounter this need to systematize, there's a way of doing that so that the systems talk to each other. And I don't know if that resonates with other people, but that's sort of how I'm ingesting what I'm hearing today for the first time.
Hi, Steve Young, EPA retired. I have a question and a comment. The question is, can someone do like a 60-second definition of Geoverse? Because I'm not sure I really heard that.
Yeah, I think in 60 seconds, let me actually a little shorter than that. But I think the Geoverse is a leveling framework that lays out a pathway for achieving an ideal state for what the capabilities that we've identified now. So that would be it.
Okay. And Mike, yes.
We had in our plenary, we were planning the panel before, and I brought up the example of self-driving cars. I think that's a good concrete example of a Geoverse, because you need the cars to be aware of, events in real time and interact with emergency systems, but also have Google Maps or maps of the road system so they can operate and interact with streetlights and all that. So that's a good concrete example of the Geoverse.
Yeah, so I already provided one definition. It's the part of the metaverse that we can trust. But another way to look at it, and I think, it appears, according to that report, it is whatever it is that you're concerned about. If you're a policy person, it's this system of policy. If you're a technical person, it's these technical capabilities. But I see it as something you could think about as an evolution of the digital twin concept. So it's a basket of, systems of systems and ecosystem, but the sort of defining characteristic is that it has overall behavior. So you don't have to spend months looking around for data sets to look about smoke. You are able to ask the Geoverse, what can tell me about smoke? The part that I think they kind of failed in that report to do is to really look at it from both ways. So not only data-driven capabilities, but purpose-driven data.
And just on the commenting side, I like the emphasis on knowledge that I was hearing from Ryan as, kind of the top level below wisdom way of thinking about things. I would push back on system of systems as a term, and this has been a long-standing personal bugaboo, but to me, something like an airplane is a system of systems where you don't want emergent behavior in an airplane. You want it to be reliable, totally systematic. To me, ecosystem of systems is a better way to think about it, because I think you would like to enable kind of emergent behavior within your ecosystem. So just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, I think in terms of semantics, I think maybe that specific, system of systems terminology, a lot of people have expressed confusion. What does this mean? But I think in my understanding, it's talking about an open system of systems, right? It's an open system of open systems. But that's different than a closed system of closed systems, right? But I think those are both kind of under the hierarchy of system of systems.
When people hear system of systems, they start to head off in the wrong direction because it implies more of a kind of centralized approach.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. I think we should talk about that if we were talking about like a winter meeting, terminology, right? Framing.
Hi, this is Ken Casey, NOAA NCI. Steve, what you just said about an ecosystem of systems and emergent behavior really resonated with me because I was thinking, how would I define all of this in the 60 seconds or less? And I think my definition is what we're talking about here is building social networks for data. And because I really think about like a lot of what we're trying to do is enable the data and all of the relationships there to connect with one another naturally through these linked knowledge graphs. And precisely because then, just like social media and in our children and our personal lives enables all kinds of emergent behavior, some good, some bad, who knows, right? It's driven by the users of the system. That's kind of what we're really trying to do, is enable our data to support all these emergent behaviors. Now, our goal, of course, is for the betterment of society, but so at any rate, that really resonated with me, this idea of more of an ecosystem of systems that supports emergent behaviors, which of course we hope are for good.
Other questions from folks?
Yeah, now that I'm done pontificating, I actually had a question for Josh, because I loved how you came at this from this perspective, the cynic's perspective. And I think maybe my question to you would be, what would it take to convince you that what we're talking about here with the Geoverse really is a step function to a whole new paradigm? What would win you over, so to speak?
So I Googled step function and it just said significant change. Right. So that's another term with a bit of a semantic void at the middle of it. But I think, something is maybe considered a step change if you can look back and say, I didn't really see this coming. And so I think the idea of emergent behavior is a good way to frame that. Unexpected difference from the past that you can look back and say, wow.
The world is actually data-driven.
Right. Or, a spatial data infrastructure that doesn't just give you a phone number.
So follow on, I think, to that. I think this is a good line of discussion. I think my question is then, you say it's something we can look back on, but I think what the Geoverse framers are arguing is, if we have no control over this, if we don't establish an ontology and a framework now, we're just looking back and we're saying, oh, wow, this has happened. There's no trustability. Everything's, privately owned and closed. The legal interoperability was never solved, and there's no automation there. And I think that's what my understanding is. That's where I'm coming from. Is this is an opportunity at a very critical point in technology and the physical reality that we need to consider taking some action there.
So NSF just sort of finished up this project called Earth Cube, which might be a pretty direct parallel to this Geoverse, I think, or at least the idea was to try to develop such a thing. And, it didn't seem to produce, it created a large network of people working on it and a lot of connections, but there was no final product, I think. And, Google sucks up a lot of space, like Keyhole you mentioned, created Google Earth, and Google really didn't do much with that, and no one else is willing to compete. It's sort of like the new Microsoft, where like any product that competes with Microsoft gets destroyed. So, you have Google, Digital Earth, right? What do people think about that as like a foundation? The problem with Google is who knows what that future is. So, I'm just thinking, how do we get past that large gorilla that's sort of, controlling things. I don't know.
The question for the panelists.
Yeah, I mean, I just, I don't know.
I mean, one thing to think of, because I think that's a real challenge, it's really hard to force innovation in a specific predefined direction. But the important thing is, I think, having the protocols and standards that people can agree to and not having to dictate all the underlying implementations, because that's where a lot of the, I mean, think about how markup language and specifically XML has just led to vast, capability to do interoperability. But that's just but XML is inherently a definition. It's not the implementation of it. And there are lots of different implementations of it, but it allows things to connect and communicate. I think when you're looking at this, there's too much unknown about how technology is going to change and evolve, and you need to leave the space for things to innovate and evolve and get bigger and more useful. But I think the important thing is how is one, ontologically based system going to be able to communicate and interact and be able to merge data together? What are those definitions and protocols? Seems like the really important foundation from my opinion.
Yeah, a couple, going back one, and then, I think we should maybe go down the standards path and map that to Geoverse. But going back, so I'm involved in another NSF effort, and you can kind of look at this as maybe sort of a smaller scale, prototype of what a Geoverse activity would look like, but it's the Open Knowledge Network, which is now in phase 3, and we're past reviews, we're in award phase. But this categorizes things in terms of theme 1, which are building knowledge graphs of specific problems, of specific domains, right? There's standards that are part of this, right? RDF, semantic web, JSON LD, production of documents. There are standards, but they're loose standards, right? And then, then there's theme 2 proposals, which are integrators. These theme 2 proposals are supposed to find interoperability at a higher level, right? So they're taking the theme 1 proposals and then mapping these. So, and then theme 3 proposals are education, and they're actually looking at knowledge graphs of knowledge graphs to sort of build out, education materials and specific trainings to get adoption. So, but I think those theme 1 and theme 2 proposals, the way they've approached these standards-based that are loose, and then looking at it as, you can develop individually in cells, and then look at it, how do we interoperate these things? We already have this baseline of standard, and then, using that, we can kind of build on it to the next level of standard, right? So it's kind of iterative, it's kind of layered, and then, I think that kind of ties into the Geoverse tables, which are kind of very high level. These are just extremely kind of high level. They don't dictate how to do things, right? Just, to this last point, they just kind of say, here's a pathway, here's a swim lane, read it how you understand it. Here kind of, here's a leveling framework. We can establish maturity matrices over these things, right? So that's it. Right?
Just wanted to quickly comment on the reference to Google. That's a really interesting one, because Google, the Keyhole Map, Google Maps team actually came to OGC and said, can we make KML an open standard at OGC? And they were a little bit cagey about the reason for it. When we asked them, they said, well, it's because we're incredibly generous. But what the real reason, which we figured out, was that, they wanted to, collect and monetize the world's geospatial knowledge. And it turns out you couldn't do that from text and web pages. And so they somehow needed to get, a quantum scalability of people expressing their geospatial knowledge. And turns out the way to do that is an open standard. So that was a really sort of interesting lesson that even Google, needs that openness in order to reach the scale that they want to do, and that sometimes in some ways we benefit from.
John Ralph, NOAA's NCEI. I was thinking about what you were saying, Ryan, and I was wondering if the question we should be asking ourselves is, what are the questions we should be asking about those steps we need to take, like your NSF project, that will drive us to make that step that we're, with a capital S, that we're talking about. So what are the use and standards-based projects that we can define for the Geoverse that would get us to some next plane of systems, or ecosystem of systems? So some thinking about what specific projects might we undertake that would define both the standards, or at least a set of standards, and specific goals to achieve that would collectively bring us to another level.
Yeah, so my own thoughts on this are, we take some of the digital twins work that we've been seeing that are well defined in terms of end users, use cases that deal with data fusion across agencies, the coastal zone digital twins, NASA, NOAA, CNES, the disaster pilots that OGC is running. And, we use those in a testbed framework to establish some, verifiability and validation of requirements even. And that, I think those are that's the pathway to getting questions from empiricism. And develop governance around it. So I think maybe Josh, I might pick on you to talk about this disaster pilot. You might have another session you want to save it for, but getting people to work together and across these funding models, across these and seeing collaboration. This is kind of teasing out what do we need to establish for legal interoperability? What is a governance model that would work practically now? And the now part I think is also critical and needs to be emphasized. That's it.
Yeah, the disaster management model is really interesting because when we started in on this, we talked to the people up here and they said, the most important thing is the command chain. We need to be able to tell people on the ground what to do. And then, in the few minutes that first responders and so on had to talk with us, we'd say, well, is the command chain the most important thing? And they said, are you kidding? We do most of the stuff on our own. The communication's lousy. The commanders don't know what's going on. We need to make our own decisions. We need a place in this. And that's developed, I think, into, it's a social ecosystem. It's a system in which governance is by consensus among the stakeholders. And interestingly, that tends to a certain minimalism because there isn't that much governance that all of those people can agree on, but it's the only ones that stick.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on legal interoperability. I think it's a big word for something that's fairly simple, licensing of data, making sure people understand the constraints. But I had meetings with some of our industry stakeholders, and for them, licensing of data, their sensitive data, it puts it into context. If these data are made public and say we very clearly define like these data shouldn't be used to sue us, that's not going to stop someone from, filing a lawsuit and causing millions of dollars in cost because of project delays. So there are some like fundamental realities, but yeah, I think there is a tension, and this is speaking to what you said. What do we have to get in front of? That if we don't address this, we're going to look back and say that we missed the opportunity. With legal interoperability, I think there is a perceived conflict between sensitive data and open data, and how we enforce use and access constraints. I think there should be a system, a technology that should enable data to freely flow to people who have the rights to access them.
So hi, Monica Youngman with NCI. I'm really curious about the conversation about people and users and how they're using the data. And I think that is a really important aspect of this. And how do we capture that, those social networks, and how people use and interact and understand and make decisions based on data? How do we capture that as data to be able to use in this ecosystem of systems? And kind of along those lines, I'd also be curious, like, are there groups and expertise that we need to include in these discussions, such as social scientists or behavioral scientists? And I guess I'd be curious for the panel, what have you seen opportunities there or gaps in promoting the Geoverse?
I just have a reaction to the comment. Were you not, you were going to give it to someone else? So this is a reaction to, how do we learn how people are using data and what would help, I guess. And I just want to highlight a pitfall. So the people who are using data are really busy. They don't have a lot of time to talk. And so I've seen processes which is, let's go out and interview people and spend, hours and hours with them, having them sketch out their knowledge graphs and decision-making processes. And it's just a non-starter from the user's perspective. And I don't know what the right solution is, but asking the users if you could just observe them and not interview them, so, be a fly on the wall as opposed to being someone who's demanding time and attention, might be a way around that. But I see this in some of the national security work that we do, which is, we're trying to sort of scale out very similar types of systems, and they're taking people who are frantically busy every day and saying, can you sit down with us for a couple of weeks and tell us what you do? And it just doesn't work. And then the other comment I had, which goes back to Jonathan's comments, is, all of these data and the systems that we use to house and distribute and process and make decisions off data, they're really expensive. And so the data themselves are expressions of power and influence, and the systems are expressions of power and influence. So I'm thinking of that 2% tail. That 2% tail somehow has to be represented in the early on investment decisions about what gets measured and how it gets measured.
Yeah, I don't know if I could talk. I was raising up my hands. I think that there's a lot of discussions, and I agree with most things has been said. Just getting back as a response to the social science or social scientist. In fact, I think for Geoverse or any digital twins or future version, the social science does play a big role. For example, now we are conducting a project which is on EV and how that impact and how to design the best infrastructure for EVs. And without the social scientist, we wouldn't be able to know how to conduct the interviews within the framework that has been set up by the government. So there are peer reviews and what kind of questions to be asked. And also when we have the team work together, it's from several different domains. So I'm from the geo side and the geospatial information. And then we have the engineering side, building the electricity infrastructure. We also have system operations. And we have, of course, the scientist, the social scientist. And when we come together, I found that the person that deals with the best in terms of integration of the ideas, make sure everyone understand each other is a social scientist. So the ontology and understanding from that angle, I think the social science side could play a critical role in this. Just want to go beyond that and talk about a few points as I was hearing. One is about Steve asked a question, and that's also a question that we discussed among the panelists, is what do we really mean by Geoverse? I think in order to understand that, we potentially could look at what's the history to this. So we heard about the digital Earth that has been existing or been talked about for about two decades. And EarthCube program in NSF has been running for about 11 years. So now they're also looking at what's the next step for EarthCube. I don't know if we have any NSF connects in the room, but what's the next step? So digital twin, in fact, that's one right after digital Earth, and also there may be some connection to EarthCube. And there has been, the National Academy organized several sessions on that, and they're producing something. And Jacqueline from NASA AST program funded about 14 projects. That's probably the first batch of projects funded by federal agencies. And now Geoverse. And what are the connections to them? If we look at one of the concepts that Josh put up, okay, Geoverse could be one of the most successful metaverse. I agree with that. And so how to ensure that we could have that kind of success? There are several points. I think 3 points. One is that we really need to make things open. We have the luxury in the US to have all our government data sets, as long as they're public oriented, they should be open. And we have the luxury of enjoying that, which is great. And which also contribute a big way to the open science and drives the open of the data sets. Another aspect is that we didn't talk much is about trust and confidence. When we access the data sets, when we access the service, when we access the information, what kind of trust or confidence levels could we put on the system? I think some kind of credential system needs to be built into different component or different verses. So we could have a functionable and good Geoverse ecosystem. Another part is that this was brought up, how to show the success of Geoverse. We always need to have some kind of steps, step 1, step 2, and different levels of success. So the early stage would definitely to look at the use cases, especially those pressing challenges that has high impact or visibility, and to look at those. And then maybe we could have multiple domains working together to look at more complex problems. Or from technology side, could we develop something like Geoverse, which could help us address different types of problems created by or originated by, for example, wildfire or agriculture, like food security, and addressing that from the citizen side. What kind of, where do we have the lack of food, and what is causing that? Is that because of the water drought, or is that because of some other issues? For example, too much water, flooding, or some other issues. So I think at different levels of measurements about the success, it will be great to say that. I didn't say that from us yet. So I just want to share several thoughts. Yeah.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so that was a great question about what do users want. I mean, there should be a movie. But one interesting side effect, if we realize it and figure out how to do it properly, is what you said, Ryan, processes data. And when you have an interactive, collaborative infrastructure, people are doing their work. That, what they want is in what they're doing. It's like Amazon, but hopefully we can organize that in a way which is maybe slightly more ethical. But, an interesting part of that is that, what we tend to save, right, is our successes. All this workflow worked, and then everybody else redoes the ones that didn't work because they think you didn't look at it. And so, having let's, for the sake of argument, call it a Geoverse where we save the failures as well as the successes is more of a complete answer.
So thank you very much. Great discussion, and we'll see what the Geoverse brings in the future. Thanks.